Now it's look at this. Spencer McLaughlin showing up from Locked On Ducks. Spencer, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I love that you're rolling through the lineup of Locked On hosts we got at the network. That shows good judgment, Mark.
There's a good judgment by me and a few good hosts over there. No question about that. You're on the A list. I don't think there's any question about that.
I try to be.
You got two of those shows over there.
I do. I
You pull
do.
it
I was
down.
just working on both of them before I hopped on here. Actually, just
Well,
all shows, all content, all the time. Who says there's nothing to talk about for college football in April, Mark? Not me. Not me.
not I as well. There has to be something to talk about. Otherwise, I'm not going to show up, and I always show up. So what we're going to talk about with you is this Oregon football team, and I guess we'll start with one Dante Moore. Okay, the last time we really saw Dante Moore, and maybe this was blown a bit out of proportion, but he seemed to be on a tear of pick sixes in the Pac 12 there for a few consecutive
R.I.P.
weeks. So, how do you assess his play? Do you think he's going to be challenged in this quarterback battle?
Well, I'd like to think so. I really would. I think it'd be good for him to not just be handed the job. I don't know that that's what is going to happen. When Dan Lanning was asked about it to begin spring practice, he said we're competing at every position, and didn't single out any particular name or any particular spot. I think that what Dante Moore can bring to the table is he can be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. We also saw he's capable of being a quarterback worthy of being benched in college football. So I think there's such a huge range of outcomes for him. And I think that he made an incredibly mature choice to, transfer to Oregon to wait behind Dylan Gabriel for a year and then get the chance. That's part of the reason I fully expect him to win the job over Austin Novosad. And again, I'd like for there to be an actual battle because Austin Novosad is not some slouch. He's a guy going into his third year, and he's got an extra year of watching a veteran quarterback with Will Stein as the offensive coordinator in control. So I think there's certainly a chance. I don't know that I would put it over 10%. This is a staff that when Kenny Dillingham was there as the OC, granted, but Dan Lanning recruited Dante Moore and had him committed before before they went out and got Austin Novosad. Dillingham left for ASU. Dante Moore flipped to UCLA. Then they were able to flip Novosad from Baylor. And certainly they didn't, have Novosad committed knowing, oh, well, Dante Moore's coming back in a couple of years. Like, this is a guy they recruited fully thinking 4-star recruit, top 10 quarterback in the class, if I remember correctly. This is a guy they recruited thinking he could be a starting quarterback one day. He has those sorts of traits. He's got a good arm. He's incredibly accurate from, the limited action we have seen. So I think he can be pushed I think Dante Moore can be pushed by Austin Novosad. I do think the ceiling on Dante Moore is higher. And, the coaches have already kind of told you with their career trajectories, they wanted more than they wanted Novosad. So I'm inclined to think it'll be Dante Moore who wins the starting job, but I hope there's an honest to goodness quarterback battle.
No Tez Johnson, no Trayshawn Holden. Evan Stewart comes back. Big game against Ohio State. Went through certain stretches of the season, missing in action to a certain extent, and little productivity unless I'm missing somebody after Evan Stewart.
Yeah, I mean, the receiving core is interesting. I think that and the defensive backfield are the most interesting position groups to watch because there's so many different ways they can play out for Oregon. The receiving core is as stacked with talent as it ever has been, and it's just continuing what Junior Adams built the last couple of years with the Ducks. Like, they have retained almost all the guys that they've recruited from the high school ranks. The transfers they've brought in have done a great job, like Tez Johnson, Gary Bryant Jr. was a transfer who was hurt last year, but he's still around for a sixth season of college football. They've got DeCorian Moore coming in as the number one wide receiver recruit in 2025. So I think that for Oregon's wide receiver room, I'm not concerned about the talent level. There is a production question, but I don't question whether you've got guys that are big enough, fast enough, strong enough, talented enough to be a high-end receiving core. I just don't know exactly how that depth chart shakes out, how many wide receivers work their way into the fold. The last 2 years, it's typically been 4 that have been, productive wide receivers. They get 400 or more yards in a season. So I'm curious to see how all that works. But I mean, 5-star Jurion Dickey still has not made an impact at Oregon. He got hurt his first year, buried on the depth chart last year. Does he take a step forward? Kyler Kasper's going into his 4th year as an Oregon Duck, former blue chip recruit who's sticking around for some reason. He could certainly go elsewhere and get more reps, but he's still at Oregon for one reason or another. DeCorian Moore, it's hard to see how he doesn't play at least some as a true freshman. Wide receivers, this hype just don't come around. He's the 2nd highest rated recruit Oregon has ever had, regardless of position, and the highest rated wide receiver. And then you've got Evan Stewart coming back, who was great last year. And then you bring in Malik Benson as well, who's been a journeyman in college football, but was the top JUCO or one of the top JUCO receivers a couple of cycles ago, went to Alabama, didn't play a lot, went to Florida State. He was a guy that I think had people thinking Florida State would be good, and he's one of several guys. And then, of course, it was a disaster. And so I don't really know what to expect from him because he's never had 400 receiving yards in a Division I season. But, you know, I know that guys that come out of the JUCO ranks can be incredibly productive. So there are just so many questions swirling around the position room. And heck, maybe it comes down to who does Dante Moore or whoever ends up starting, if it's him or Novosad, who does Dante Moore have the best chemistry with? You know, who does he like the most? What stands out in spring? But I don't know how all that plays out. I think that the spring game is going to be able to tell us a lot.
Spencer, if there's any position in college football from last year that I can give a pass to, it would be anyone playing wide receiver at Florida State. So lack of production. Okay, it's probably not on you because we know what the offensive line and the quarterbacking situation was there.
Yeah, it was about as bad as it could possibly be at the Power 4 level. I don't think it could have been any worse. Yeah. I really don't. I mean, they beat Cal and Charleston Southern.
And Cal missed 3 field goals.
3 field goals. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was the most Cal loss in the history of Cal losses.
Yeah, Cal had a string of those.
If they hadn't had Charleston Southern on the schedule, and everybody's got an FCS out there, so it's not unreasonable. But if FSU didn't have that late season ACC cupcake that a lot of ACC schools and SEC schools have as well, there's a possibility that Cal would have lost to the second 1-11 football team in 3 years because they lost to 1-11 Colorado before Dion got there in 2022.
Well, let's stay with the head coaching position and go to Delanning because I don't know that we can really criticize anything he's done since he got to Oregon. And he's on the list of the next
Mark,
guy.
I assure you Oregon fans can find things, but go ahead.
Well, I'm going to get there with one in particular because he's kind of the next guy in line that's the off-season list of here's the next guy that's going to win a national championship. Between he and Sark is pretty much the list.
Sark is who popped into my mind when you just said that.
But the Rose Bowl performance, now that was a tremendous Ohio State team that just got on a roll. No question about that. But it just seemed like a lack of preparation that, to me, looked similar to the year before. We know the blown calls and just the questionable calls. Obviously, if the players would have executed and the plays would have been better against Washington at home, they could have won that game. Obviously, they missed a kick at the gun. It was that close. But then the follow-up to that and playing the conference championship game, and they go down by like 18 points.
20-3, yeah. They were down 20-3.
Yeah,
came back to take the lead, but they were down 17 points.
Yeah, again, it just seemed like, wow, this team should be better prepared for a big game. They're playing for their playoff lives. And now we see it against Ohio State at the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, there's a question in the chat that I just wanted to answer real quickly about Tom flipping to USC, and Trojan Fight is saying Oregon media insinuates they will get him back. I know they're going to try. I don't know that they will be successful, but I do know that they will try, Trojan Fight. So anyway, when you look at Oregon's big game performances, yeah, there have been some duds, no doubt about it. There have been some really high-profile letdown games or poorly managed sequences, like no question. And I think that in those spots, winning those big games is the next step for Dan Lanning as a head coach. I don't think we should disregard, Mark, that he's yet to lose to an unranked team, knock on wood. I just watched Kalen DeBoer, who beat Dan Lanning 3 times in a row. I just watched him lose to an unranked. I watch a lot of unranked teams win that, so there is something to winning all the games you should. I also think that this can get slightly overblown with regards to, well, Dan Lanning hasn't won any big games. Well, does the Big Ten championship game not count? Does going to Utah in a college game day matchup, does that also not count? Like, there are arbitrary, and then you have the Ohio State game at Autzen Stadium this year. Those are probably the best wins, big game wins that Dan Lanning has had. There have been some other good ones. Those are probably the most high profile examples. But, watching the progression of the coaching staff over the last couple of years, I think has been pretty clear. They, in their first year, the worst game, the Washington game was bad. Frankly, the Oregon State game was worse. That was an implosion. Washington was a little unlucky that Bo Nix gets hurt at the end of the game, and then, your defense not able to get a stop in a big moment, a questionable decision, go for it on fourth down. Yeah, you gave that one up. But the Oregon State game, the Beavers completed 6 passes and scored 37 points and overcame a 21-point deficit in just over a quarter. Like, that was worse.
That was the game where they ran the ball like 25 times in a row. Or something
and
like
Oregon just couldn't stop them. And I mean, it was, that was really bad. But then you see what has happened since then and realize, okay, that was year one. And then that was his first time ever being a head coach, and you're gonna take your lumps, and that was about as big of a lump. That was one of the biggest moments in Oregon State football history the last 20 years, easily. So that was a significant lump, but the progression has continued to be there. And going into last year, I got questions on my show all the time. Well, is Lanning going to win a big game? Lanning hasn't won enough big games. Well, then he beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten championship. Well, he wasn't doing that before, but again, first year, had bad late game sequences where they lost to Washington State and they lost to Washington and they lost to Oregon State as well. And the defense wasn't where they wanted it to be. Next year, they got better, got to the conference championship game. Next year, they win a conference championship. And I don't know that progression continues along to, well, all of a sudden they're going to be a Final Four team this year because they lose a lot from last year's team that was really talented. But to say that Dan Lanning isn't growing as a head coach is just factually inaccurate. And so I think people want to see him succeed. Of course, Oregon fans do, because, the evaluation of Lanning is 3 years long. But for Oregon fans, the evaluation of when are you going to get over the hump and win that national championship has been going on for several decades at this point. But the big game narrative, I think, doesn't hold as much water when you put the Big Ten championship game, but especially Ohio State in there. But the Rose Bowl also shows you, he still needs to get better. He and his staff have to continue to improve. They got out-coached in that game. That was my biggest takeaway. Ohio State, you want to make the case they have a better roster? Sure, go ahead. But I watched those exact same teams play on a football field that year, and Oregon was the better team that day. Ohio State wasn't perfect, but the refs botched a review and gave Ohio State 7 points they should not have had. Oregon was sloppy in a number of other areas, still found a way to win the football game. It was close, and again, Ohio State wasn't perfect, but they came out and they were ready to go for that one, and they were prepared, and they scored early on offense, and they got some stops defensively, and of course, neither of those things happened in the Rose Bowl. So I think the next step is being better in the big games all the time, because you're right. The slow starts on offense and defense, frankly, showed up in the Pac-12 championship game against Washington, showed up against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So maybe it's something about being on a neutral site. Maybe that's what, the next step is. But I think the progress has absolutely been there. But to just go out and say, well, he just doesn't win big game, you can't say that anymore. He hasn't won the big game. He hasn't won a national championship. That's the only thing missing from his resume right now. 3 straight double-digit win seasons, a 12-0 regular season for just the second time in Oregon history, and a Big Ten championship. The only thing missing is a national championship.